Hi everyone. This video is specifically a follow-up to my last video where I talked about this Sol-Ark. Now, what I was trying to say was that this Sol-Ark is not the right fit for me, my family, and my household loads. And I think I jumped to the conclusion without giving enough background as to why I think that. In this video, I hope to provide more background so that there's a better understanding of why I got there and what I did getting there. Stay tuned till the end of this video if you want to see the Sol-Ark run with this Autotransformer on it. I'd like to start off by saying that I've been a fan of Sol-Ark for a very long time. Over the last couple of years, I have recommended this unit to hundreds of people, and I was recommending the 8K version prior to this. And I've even made a video in the past showing a friend of mine who is a professional solar installer, and he was talking about all the benefits. He really likes installing these. Now, after my experience with this, and he and I have chatted about it, he did clarify that most of the off-grid clients that he is working with are running all their heavy loads on propane. Not like me, I'm running my heavy loads on electrical.
Hey guys, Ben Solar and Battery here. I've installed a number of these Sol-Arks on off-grid houses, and I think the biggest difference I'm seeing here is that most of the houses we work on that are off-grid have been off-grid for years. So all of their heavy loads, you know, the dryer, what else, the stove, you know, all the big stuff is usually propane, which, I mean, that's kind of the reality of it, is that, you know, they've been off grid forever. The equipment didn't used to be as good as it is now. And so yeah, they don't really have any heavy loads. And so the Sol-Ark has been great for them.
When I caused this inverter to overload, I was systematically turning on certain loads to represent the situation that we kept having. This inverter was shutting down on us on a regular basis, and I had finally figured out what was going on, so I represented that in the video. But I will go into more details on exactly how I represented it and why later in the video. Under my last video, a lot of you have commented, writing in the comments underneath it, that a lot of the features and benefits of this are better suited for someone who is running their home on grid and only has a small critical loads panel connected to the inverter. That's what you have said. This might be true, but I'm only testing this inverter in an off-grid situation, and I can't speak to its features while on grid. So let's go back to the beginning. For years, this was on my wish list as the ultimate inverter. And probably one of the mistakes that I had going into the testing of this was I was probably expecting too much from it. I had built it up in my mind as the ultimate, the perfect, this amazing device, and I was probably just trying to get too much out of it without properly realizing its limitations. The very first time that the Sol-Ark was running the property and then the Sol-Ark shut down due to AC overload, I was running around thinking maybe I had left a circuit breaker on for a really big load. Maybe I accidentally left on my baseboard heater, or maybe we left on the oven or something. I was running around checking the appliances and the circuit breakers. So the second time that it shut down, I was running around with an amp meter, and I'm clamping this on the wires for all of my appliances, thinking maybe I had mislabeled the circuit breakers in my circuit breaker box, and I was shutting down the wrong ones for these large 240 volt loads. And maybe there were still some 240 volt loads drawing power that I wasn't aware of. So during that first week of using this inverter, I kept thinking to myself that I must be drawing more than the 9,000 watt limit of this inverter. I must be doing that somewhere without my knowledge. I must have something on the wrong circuit. I must have a switch on that should be off. I kept blaming myself going around trying to find where is this extra power being drawn that I'm not aware of. The third time this inverter went into AC overload, I was at this point unscrewing wires. I was taking out circuit breakers. I was really pulling my hair out trying to figure out where is this extra power being drawn. Again, at the time, I kept thinking that I must be going over 9,000 watts somewhere. The fourth time this shut down on me, I was thinking maybe I've got an appliance that's plugged in that's drawing more than it should be. So I pulled out my refrigerator inside the kitchen, inside the house, and I put an amp meter on it, and I was checking the inrush current, thinking, the refrigerator is getting older at this point, and maybe the compressor is sticking and drawing a huge amount of inrush current. Or I was inside the garage and I was making sure that I didn't accidentally leave my air compressor plugged in. Something like that. Again, all of this time I keep thinking to myself that I'm drawing more than 9,000 watts. After the fifth time that it shut down, at this point I know for certain that my loads are not going over 9,000 watts, so I start looking for other solutions. There is a data sticker on the side of the inverter, and I showed that sticker in the last video. Now it states on the sticker that the maximum from 1L to neutral is 4,800 watts. Now I had made an incorrect assumption that that was referring to the imbalance between the two phases. It's not. It's a hard limit of any one phase. Didn't figure that out until having spent all of that effort and time systematically going through all of the loads in my house. Now, as with nearly all of my videos, my goal is to try to save you, the audience, time and effort. Let me waste my time and effort to figure it out and then share with you my experience, hopefully saving everyone else time and effort. The reason why I kept thinking that I was going over 9,000 watts is because every time the inverter shut down, it threw a code. Here's a screenshot of the code log, F34, which is AC overload fault. So in the manual on page 38, it says, please reduce heavy loads. Now it would have been a lot easier to diagnose this for me if it had been throwing code F26 for bus unbalance, but that is not the code that it was throwing. It kept telling me F34, which is why I kept thinking that I was going over 9,000 watts. Now once we were aware of this, we spent a lot more time thinking about what loads we were turning on. And even with that additional effort on our part, being Elena and I, we still wound up overloading this, which finally left me to the conclusion that this inverter is not the right fit for me and my household. Please allow me a moment to break down some of the loads in the house. We'll start with the tiny loads category. These are going to be the LED lighting, the modem, router, the ventilation system that I have down in the crawl space called an HRV, all the way down to the little microwave clock, not the microwave itself, but the little clock, the little IR sensors, which are on the garage door openers, cell phone chargers that might be left plugged in. My kid's nightlight, even when it's off, it's still plugged in, drawing a tiny bit of power. Now all those tiny loads, they add up. Now they're not running 24/7, but they are running most of the time throughout the day, especially this past year due to the pandemic. We've been working from home. Now all those little things added together is a little bit over 1 kilowatt. In the past video, I showed you them. They are 1.08 kilowatt or 1,080 watts. And so that's all those little loads added together during the day when we're home, when our computers are on, when we're working. Now the large loads are going to be these 240 volt loads. Now these are going to be things like the electric oven, the dryer, the water heater, the baseboard electric heater. Now all of those large loads, they're all between 4 and 5,000 watts or 4 and 5 kilowatts. Now Elena and I are very aware that we cannot run two large loads at the same time. We're aware of that regardless of which inverter system we are using. For example, 99% of the time, the circuit breaker to the electric water heater is off because the solar hydronic system, the solar hot water system, is handling all of those loads. So if I manually turn on the electric water heater, it's a very specific time frame for a short time, and I make sure that nothing else is turned on at the same time. Or if we need to run the electric clothes dryer, we make sure we don't do that at the same time that the oven is on. And it's those types of working with the system that we've been doing for years and has become second nature for us. In the last video, I chose to turn on the water heater because it was a middle of the road load and it was pure resistive, so we wouldn't have the motor load of the dryer, and it wouldn't periodically be shutting down and turning back on like the oven does. So that's why I chose the electric water heater. The last category that I'll mention is going to be the medium-sized appliances. Now these are going to be things that are 120 volts, so they plug into only one phase, and they're all around 1800 watts. Now these are my table saw, my miter saw, my planer, my wife's hair dryer, the microwave. However, a lot of them are inductive loads. They have a very high surge. So I didn't want to wheel over an appliance, like a table saw, that has a very high surge, because then I would have gotten several comments, rightfully so, saying that maybe this shut down just because of the high surge. That's why I chose to plug in two small electric space heaters, which added together to 1800 watts, because they are pure resistive loads. That way there was no surge on the system. So to summarize, in the last video, I had the base load of the house running, I had one large appliance running, and then I plugged in just one extra device. So that's why I chose those exact loads in the last video, and I turned them on in such a way because that was representative of exactly what kept happening to us. Now in that last video, I had the base loads running and I had one large appliance. Now at that time, I was over 5600 watts, but I had the two phases nearly perfectly balanced. They were 80 watts difference. Now 80 watts out of 5600, I think that's pretty darn close. And I did that on purpose because I wasn't trying to throw off the balance with those base loads. We've already gone through our circuit breaker box and made sure that our base loads in the house and garage are balanced between the two phases. Right before I turned on the space heaters, we were well balanced. Then I turned on the two space heaters, and that created an imbalance between the two phases of about 1800 watts, which is representative of one medium-sized load. And that is the point when the inverter shut down, with about an 1800 watt imbalance between L1 and L2. I hope that me learning the hard way allows it to become clearer for anyone else so that you can properly weigh the pros and cons of this unit before making your purchase decision. Now, a lot of comments that I've received have suggested different fixes that I could do to potentially fix this in my situation. One of them would be to move all of my 240 volt loads over to propane. For example, a dryer that might be drawing 4800 watts, if you move the heating element to propane by a propane dryer, then it might move 4500 watts off of it to propane, in which case you'd be left with 300 watts to run the control board, the motor, and the blower. Personally, in my situation, I'm going to keep all of my loads on electric. I can generate my own electricity right here on site using solar panels, and if you have a better site, you might even be able to incorporate some wind or hydro into that renewable energy strategy. But that's what I personally want to do, is just be 100% off-grid and renewable energy, no fossil fuels if I can help it, and that's my aim, that's my goal. So another possible solution is to get two Sol-Arks and pair them together. At that point, I would have just over 9,000 watts per phase, and I probably would never have a problem with that. So that's another solution. And several of you have suggested that I move the Autotransformer from my Growatt system and put the Autotransformer onto the Sol-Ark. Now, this was not something that I initially did because, in my opinion, the Autotransformer is fixing a problem. So with the Growatts, the problem is that they put out 240 volts only. They don't put out 120 volts. The Autotransformer is how I can split that and get a neutral tap so that I have 120 volts. The Sol-Ark is really cool in that it puts out both 120 and 240 volts natively out of the unit. So I didn't feel a need to add an Autotransformer. But enough of you have asked for that I will do that for you. So the Autotransformer might help with the imbalance between the two phases and might allow for one phase to go higher. We'll find out together. However, the Autotransformer draws a phantom load, and the harder you push it to imbalance, the more power that the Autotransformer consumes internally to do the work of balancing the two phases. So one of the benefits of the Sol-Ark as it sits is that it's an incredibly efficient inverter. So if I add the Autotransformer to it, then the system becomes less efficient. So that is a downside of adding an Autotransformer to it. You'll have to weigh that for your own situation, but enough of you have asked for the Autotransformer to be tested with the Sol-Ark, so I'll do that for you. So the bottom line is that one Sol-Ark is not powerful enough for me, my household, and my loads. It might be appropriate for you. You'll just have to weigh the pros and cons for yourself. At this point, I've turned the Sol-Ark back on. You can see we're drawing 0 watts. Over here on the circuit breaker box, everything is turned off. And we'll check the Victron Smart Shunt, and it's showing 74 watts being consumed. So now we'll go ahead and we'll turn on the Autotransformer, which I put here. We'll see, well, it's interesting, huh? So it's showing 53 watts here and negative 54 watts there. But over here it's showing 87 watts total. I'm not sure why it's showing that difference between the two, but maybe it'll go away when we add a load to it. So let's try adding the water heater. And you can see 4,600 watts, 2280, 2320. Now we'll go inside the house and I'll throw the transfer switch so we put our loads back on this Sol-Ark inverter. At this point, we're running the entire house and garage on the Sol-Ark. Let's take a look at the display. So we're drawing 1,300 watts total, and it looks very evenly split, maybe 20 watts or so difference. We can now throw on the Autotransformer. Well, I was not expecting it to get worse. All right, let's try that again. Turn that off. Huh, yep, okay. Well, that's weird. Try it again. Yeah, so it got worse. That's interesting. All right, well, let's try throwing on the big 240 volt water heater. So this is with the auto transformer still on. Space heaters are plugged in. That's on. All right, so it's still shut down even with the auto transformer being on. Unfortunately, that did not fix it for me. Now there is one more variation that we can try. On the last video, I had another commenter ask if we could try running the Sol-Ark inverter with the auto transformer, but no neutral from the Sol-Ark. So the only neutral will be from the auto transformer. Now, this potentially could cause some kind of unforeseen problem. I don't know, but let's give it a shot and find out what happens. This wire is from the Sol-Ark. We have the L1, L2. The neutral from the Sol-Ark is now disconnected, not tied to anything. So now we can try firing this up again. Okay, now I just turned this on and there's an alarm. So let's see what happens if we turn on the Sol-Ark. So here's the Sol-Ark, let's turn that on. So excuse me, so this is the auto transformer. All right, let's try shutting it down, and I'll let this sit for a second, and then we'll try turning it back on with the circuit breaker on from the start for the auto transformer. Now it's been a second, let's try turning it back on. And it's going to take a minute to do this. Okay, so it just kicked on again. Fans are running. And the fans always kick on just a little bit when it first starts. And now it is showing normal and no fault. I can hear the auto transformer. All right, so let's go. Good. Well, it actually worked that time when we turned it on with the auto transformer. And let's see what it's drawing from the battery. It's drawing 86 watts right now from the battery. Well, now we know if you're going to use the auto transformer without the neutral from the inverter, you gotta have the auto transformer on first. So now we'll go inside and we'll throw the transfer switch so the whole property is on the inverter. We just switched the whole property, so the house and garage, over to running on the Sol-Ark inverter again. But this time we don't have the neutral from the inverter. We only have a neutral being provided from our auto transformer. 1173, and it looks like they're perfectly split between the two. That's awesome. All right, so now we can turn on the water heater once again. So it looks like we're still evenly split right down the middle between the two. So that's great, and we know that we didn't have a problem with that before with this level of loads. But now let's go ahead and throw on our space heaters. That's great. So 7,500 watts, and they're evenly split between the two. Let's see what our load is on the auto transformer. So we have 16.5 amps on the neutral, and we can have up to 32 amps on the neutral according to the sticker on the side. So we're currently halfway loading this auto transformer, and we haven't tripped anything. And it is running, so that is cool. Well, that was a cool experiment to run. Thank you for suggesting that in the comments from the old video. So having the Autotransformer on the Sol-Ark inverter while you're in off-grid mode and no neutral from the Sol-Ark inverter, then that does help with balancing the loads out, which allowed us to get over the threshold that we were shutting down at previously. Now, I don't know if there would be unforeseen problems if this was tied to the grid, if there'd be some other scenario we're not aware of, or if this was AC coupled on the critical loads panel and the Autotransformer was on the critical loads panel. Again, I don't know if that would cause any other problems that I don't see, because I'm testing just the one function of the inverter in an off-grid situation. Since my last video, I did send an email to Sol-Ark asking them about my last video. I received a helpful response from someone there named Devin. Devin suggested using the Autotransformer with the Sol-Ark, and as we have seen in this video, that actually did help, so thank you, Devin. I have since written a follow-up email back asking some additional questions, one of which is, will they continue to warranty the Sol-Ark if it's used with an Autotransformer? And if I receive a response, I hope to share it with all of you. I'd like to very quickly address the cost difference between the Sol-Ark, and I'll compare it with the two Growatts behind me. I've received a ton of comments and questions from all of you where you really are focusing on the price tag. Now, this inverter retails for about $7,000. Now remember, it has some excellent features if you're on grid and you specifically want to backfeed. You would not compare this inverter to these Growatts if you're interested in any form of grid tie connection. In that case, this one is going to beat these out. You'd compare this with other grid tie capable inverters, not with the Growatts. Now for me personally, I don't want anything to do with the electric company. I want them out of my life as quickly as possible. So I'm only interested in off-grid situations. So if we look at this unit, it retails for about $7,000. The Growatts are about $900 each, but you have to add the Autotransformer to it. And for the sake of this argument, I'll assume that you're not like me and you don't need the extra Autotransformer added to this. So we're just looking at the $7,000 of the Sol-Ark versus $900 per Growatt inverter, about $400 for the Solar Edge Autotransformer. But that's not the whole thing. Inside the Sol-Ark, there's this box here with circuit breakers already installed, and there's a PV disconnect switch on the side. Now if I turn the camera down a little bit, we can see on the Growatts, I've had to add a circuit breaker, terminal block, and PV disconnects. So if we try to compare this and we say, well, we need the terminal block, we need some circuit breakers, and we need at least one PV disconnect, just like there's one PV disconnect over here, and we put all this inside an enclosure, this might be about $300 worth of hardware. So let's add that into our figures. So at this point, to add up the package of $900, $900, $400, and about $300 worth of the hardware, we're at $2,500 or $2,500 for the Growatt setup. But again, that's not the whole story, even in an off-grid situation. The Sol-Ark inverter is more efficient than the Growatts. Notice I'm talking about efficiency and not idle consumption. Me personally, my household, the inverters are not sitting around idle. I always have some amount of load on them. That's a lot of those tiny loads that I mentioned earlier in the video. They're just, some of those small ones are on 24/7. So the inverters are never sitting at idle. There's always some amount of load on them. But there is an efficiency difference. The Sol-Ark is more efficient than the Growatt inverters. Now when we're talking about efficiency, there's a ton of nuances, and it's outside the scope of this video for me to get into all of that. So I did some very rough back of the napkin calculations just for the sake of this video, just so that we could have the conversation. Now I would say that for my situation, I'm going to consume about an extra 1.5 kilowatt hours per day using the Growatt setup because of its lower efficiency than with the Sol-Ark setup. Now that means that I'm going to need to buy more solar, and I'm going to need to buy more battery in order to store that 1.5 kilowatt hours and to produce that 1.5 kilowatt hours per day. Now, if we look at the solar array in the backyard, for my area, I'm in the northeast of the United States. It's not a very sunny area. So I'm going to need about an extra 430 watts worth of solar panels in the backyard. Now, if you're like me, you scrounge around for deals. But let's say you don't have time for that. If I was to go to the local solar retailer down the road from me, I could buy brand new solar panels for 55 cents per watt, which means to get 430 more watts out in the backyard, I would spend $236.50. And I would also need to buy more battery capacity. Now, at about $300 per kilowatt hour, that would cost me an extra $400 in battery capacity. So now if we get a new grand total for the inverters, hardware, the solar panels, and the battery capacity, we're looking at $3,136.50. Now, let's round that up to $3,200. So this whole Growatt setup with the extra solar and with the extra battery, $3,200. Compare that to the $7,000 Sol-Ark. That is a savings of $3,800. That I'm talking only about my situation. So I really hope that this whole video is just helpful, help answer the questions that you have. So if you like the video, please hit the like button, subscribe, and leave your comments and questions below. Thank you.